Well, we are getting a new Hunger Games book and film titled Sunrise on the Reaping, and people are speculating that this will be Haymitch's book because it is focused on the Second Quarter Quell. But the more that I think about the information that we've already been presented with, the less that I think this will actually be the case. So today, let's talk about everything we already know about Haymitch Abernathy and what I think the story might actually be about. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Very cool that I get to say that now that this is my second video here on YouTube. But when I saw the official announcement for the new Hunger Games book and film, I nearly lost my mind because I just think the Hunger Games series is so brilliantly written. I read the first Hunger Games book the year that it was published in 2008, so I've been with this series a very long time. And when I saw that this new story was going to be about the Second Quarter Quell, my immediate reaction was, great, this is going to be Haymitch's story. He's the most interesting character in the entire series, and we're finally gonna get some more information about him. But then the more that I thought about the official announcements and what we already know about Haymitch's Quarter Quell, I was like, I don't actually think this book is gonna be that much about him. So today I figured we'd just go through everything we do already know about Haymitch, his life before his games, his life during the Quarter Quell, and his life post-victory, and then also share my predictions for what I think the story will actually be about. So let's first get started with all the official information we've been given about Sunrise on the Reaping. So the book is titled Sunrise on the Reaping, and it will be published on March 18th, 2025. It is 400 pages long, which is longer than each of the books in the original Hunger Games series, but shorter than the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes prequel. According to the official book synopsis, this is set 24 years before the events of the first Hunger Games book, and it starts on the morning of the reaping of the 50th Hunger Games, aka the Second Quarter Quell. So Suzanne Collins has cited David Hume's ideas and theories on governance as a major source of inspiration for the book, and I'll actually talk about that a lot more in my predictions section of the video, but I did want to first read you her official author statement. With Sunrise on the Reaping, I was inspired by David Hume's idea of implicit submission, and in his words, the easiness with which the many are governed by the few. The story also lent itself to a deeper dive into the use of propaganda and the power of those who control the narrative. The question, real or not real, seems more pressing to me every day. As for the movie, following the traditional Thanksgiving theatrical release window that all the other Hunger Games films have followed, Sunrise on the Reaping will be released on November 20th, 2026. Francis Lawrence, who directed the last 4 Hunger Games movies, will be coming back to direct, and the movie will be distributed by Lionsgate, which distributed the rest of the Hunger Games movies. Not much information about the movie is available beyond that, but given the timeline, I'm assuming they will have to be getting into production soon. So now let's get into everything we know about Haymitch in his life before becoming a mentor to Katniss and Peeta in the 74th Hunger Games. In Catching Fire, there's actually a chapter in which Katniss and Peeta are rewatching footage of the Hunger Games, and they watch Haymitch's games. So we already know how Haymitch won his Quarter Quell. Haymitch's Quarter Quell was the Second Quarter Quell. Quarter Quells were held every 25 years, and they involved some sort of special rule change. So for the 25th Hunger Games, or the first Quarter Quell, the districts had to vote on their tributes. So instead of the lottery system that we first see in the 74th Hunger Games in the original Hunger Games books, the districts had to actively choose the boy and girl that they wanted to send into the arena. And the theory behind this was that the Capitol wanted to remind these districts that they were the ones ultimately responsible for their children's deaths and for the games. As you may recall from Catching Fire, the third Quarter Quell, or the 75th Hunger Games, reaped from the existing pool of victors, and that was their special rule change. But for the 50th Hunger Games, the second Quarter Quell, and Haymitch's games, the rule change was that they needed to send in double the tributes. So instead of 2 from each district, there were now 4, and the total pool of tributes, instead of being 24, was 48. Haymitch, at age 16, is one of the 4 tributes reaped from District 12. 2 of the tributes are unnamed in the book, but one of them is Maisie Donner, who becomes very important later on in his games. Maisie Donner was a friend of Katniss's mom, and she also had a twin. That twin happens to be the mother of Madge, who you might recall from the original Hunger Games books is who gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin. Now this was changed in the movie. I personally was not a fan of the change. I don't know why they did that, but in the books it was Madge who gives her the pin. Anyways, in this chapter, Haymitch is described by Katniss as something of a looker. He looks young and strong, he has dark curly hair, and he has bright gray eyes. For the tributes parade, all 4 District 12 tributes are dressed as coal miners, and during his tribute interview in the Capitol, Caesar Flickerman, our favorite Nepo baby, asks him how he feels about there being 100% more competitors, and Haymitch responds that he doesn't see much of a difference because they will still be 100% as stupid. This earns him lots of laughs from the Capitol audience, and Katniss notes that he comes off as very snarky, indifferent, and arrogant. So the arena of the 50th Hunger Games is described as breathtakingly beautiful, and it's just like so beautiful that some of the tributes don't even notice when the games start. They're just so disoriented. But not Haymitch. He's often running to the cornucopia where he's able to grab weapons, a backpack of choice, and he's often back into the woods to hide before a lot of the tributes have even stepped off their plates. So in the opening act of the games, 18 of the 48 tributes die, and many others soon perish afterwards when they realize that this very beautiful arena is filled with very poisonous things. There's also a pack of 10 very well-stocked careers that are just patrolling the area and looking for tributes to hunt down. Haymitch, now off in the woods by himself, encounters a pack of fluffy carnivorous squirrels and stinging butterflies, but he continues to push forward. On the 4th day, there is a volcanic eruption that kills 12 of the remaining tributes, including 5 of the 10 careers, and everybody who's left is now kind of forced to confine in the woods to stay safe. In the woods, Haymitch encounters 3 career tributes. They are strong and well trained, but Haymitch is fast and he has his knife. He is able to kill 2 of these career tributes before the 3rd one disarms him and is about to slit his throat when he suddenly drops dead from a dart. Maisley Donner then steps out from the woods and says, "We'd live longer with 2 of us." And so Haymitch and Maisley form an alliance as 2 tributes from District 12. During their time together, Haymitch continues to move forward and push forward in one direction. When Maisley asks him why, he says that, well, this can't go on forever, right? The arena has to end somewhere. And when Maisley asks him what he expects to find, he says, maybe something that we can use. So the 2 of them continue to go all the way towards the edge of the arena, where they reach the edge of a cliff. At the edge of this cliff, Maisley tells Haymitch that she wants to turn back, but Haymitch says that he wants to stay there. Maisley ultimately makes the decision to split up because there are only 5 tributes left at this point, and she doesn't want the final 2 to come down to them. At the edge of the cliff, Haymitch kicks a pebble off, and it bounces back. He does this a few more times and starts laughing when he realizes that the force field can bounce objects back to him. And then suddenly he hears screaming. Katniss notes in the chapter that nobody would have really blamed Haymitch if he didn't run to Maisley. They had already broken off their alliance and there were only 5 people left. But he runs to her anyways, and he holds her hand while she dies. She dies from these like pink birds that have these very long thin beaks and they skewer her neck. But when Katniss is watching this, she thinks about how she held Rue's hand and how she couldn't do anything to save her. The 4th remaining tribute soon dies in combat, and the 3rd gets eaten by the carnivorous squirrels. So the last 2 tributes left are Haymitch and this girl from District 1. They get into kind of their final fight at the edge of this cliff. Haymitch has his knife, the girl has her axe, and they both give each other fatal wounds. Haymitch is stumbling towards the edge of the cliff. He's holding in his intestines at this point. It's not looking good for him. It's also not looking good for the girl, but it seems like she has the upper hand and that she's going to be the victor. She throws her axe at his head, thinking that it's going to be the fatal blow, but Haymitch collapses and the axe flies over him and off the cliff. So the girl, now weaponless, is just kind of standing there. She's holding her eye because Haymitch had stabbed it out. She's trying to stop the flow of blood, and she thinks that she can just like outlast him. But what she doesn't know, that Haymitch does, is that the axe is going to bounce off the force field. And that's exactly what it does. It bounces back and beds itself in her head, the cannon sounds, and Haymitch is officially declared the victor of the Second Quarter Quell. After Katniss and Peeta watch that tape, they discuss how Haymitch made the Capitol look stupid because the Capitol never intended for anybody to use that force field as a weapon. And Katniss says, quote, "I bet they had a good time trying to spin that one," which I think will be the basis of this Haymitch book. But anyways, we'll talk about that later in the prediction section. Haymitch gets patched up by the Capitol doctors and he returns home to District 12. 2 weeks after Haymitch won the Quarter Quell, President Snow executed his mother, his younger brother, and his girlfriend back in District 12 because the stunt that he pulled with the axe with the force field was viewed as an act of defiance that made the Capitol look foolish. And we know the Capitol can't have that. So for the next 23 years, because Haymitch is the only living victor from District 12, he's forced to mentor 2 tributes every year alone. And every year the tributes die. Haymitch really struggles with his guilt and grief, especially over the loss of his family and his girlfriend after winning his games, and he turns to alcoholism. He has like this self-imposed solitary confinement in his house, and he just like does not want to be near anybody. He does not want to talk to anyone. He just wants to be alone. He just wants to drink away his emotions and feelings, very understandably. He sleeps every night with a knife in his hand, and he's just really going through it. And that's the state that we meet him in when he becomes Katniss and Peeta's mentor in the first Hunger Games book. But as we know from Mockingjay and the original trilogy, Haymitch was actually able to make some pretty important connections with fellow victors, government officials, and District 13 that really aided in the revolution that occurs towards the end of the original trilogy. Okay, and now for my predictions. So there are two key reasons why I don't think this book is going to be that much about Haymitch. The first is that, well, we already know the major plot points of his games. We already know how he got raped, what he did in the arena, how he won his games, and even what happened to him after his games. I think that maybe the book will have like 20 to 30% tops about the actual Quarter Quell. The second reason is that Suzanne Collins cited David Hume's philosophy as a source of inspiration. The David Hume that Suzanne Collins cites is a Scottish philosopher who was alive in the 1700s. He wrote several essays on human nature, philosophical empiricism, and theories of governance. And in the essay that Suzanne Collins specifically talks about, he discusses how the many are so easily governed by the few. He says that force is always on the side of the governed, so it is on opinion only that the government is founded. He talks about how this extends to the most despotic and military governments, as well as the most free and popular. So that source of inspiration, combined with the fact that we already know Haymitch's major plot points during his games, and that quote from Katniss that I mentioned earlier in Catching Fire where she says that the Capitol probably had a great time trying to spin that one, all of that comes together and lends itself to the idea that the main focus of this book will be on the story that the Capitol propagates and the narrative that they weave, following the stunt that Haymitch pulls with the arena and the force field in his Quarter Quell. And then comes the question, who will be the main characters in this story and whose perspective will we be getting? So there is a possibility that this could be a multi-POV book. Maybe we could get Haymitch's perspective, we could get Snow's, we could get Maisley's, and those would all come together to make an interesting story. But it doesn't seem like Suzanne Collins really likes writing from multiple perspectives, and I do think there is a really interesting angle telling this from a singular perspective, talking about a singular struggle to understand the truth and a singular struggle to see through the propaganda. Or if it's from Haymitch's perspective, a struggle for him to tell his truth and tell his story against what the Capitol is putting out. If it is from Haymitch's perspective, I do imagine we get a lot more first-person insight on his experience in the games, which, like I mentioned previously, is probably going to be like 20 to 30% of the book. We already know that this book starts on the morning of the reaping, so there's not going to be too much happening before that. I imagine we get information on his trip back to District 12 and his reactions when he finds out Snow has killed his mother, little brother, and his girlfriend. That said, because we already know like the big picture of Haymitch's life, maybe Suzanne Collins wouldn't choose to go further into that. Okay, so maybe it's not Haymitch's perspective. Maybe it's the perspective of somebody from the Capitol, like President Snow or the Game Maker. But the reason why I don't really think it's going to be either of those two is A, we already got a book about President Snow. I don't know if Suzanne Collins would want to write another book about him. We kind of already know what shapes him and what creates the President Snow that we're familiar with in the original trilogy. I don't know if she would want to dive into a story that's somewhere in the middle ground of the timeline. And if it is a story about propaganda and the real or not real narrative, I don't know if it would make the most sense to tell that from the perspective of the government. I do understand like with the angle of telling it from the government's perspective and talking about like the behind the scenes and like what they're thinking about when they're crafting this narrative, but I don't know if that would make the most compelling story and be the most compelling vehicle through which she wants to portray her message about real or not real and the dangers of propaganda. Also, the title of the book, Sunrise on the Reaping, doesn't really lead me to believe that it's going to be from the perspective of somebody in the Capitol who's not even going to be at the reaping. So who does that leave? Well, in terms of who is actually at the reaping, we've got Haymitch, we have presumably his family, his mother, his little brother, and his girlfriend. We have Maisley Donner, and with Maisley Donner, we have Katniss's mother, Miss Everdeen, and we have Maisley's twin. So Maisley's twin is not named by first name in Catching Fire in the chapter in which they watch the scene of this reaping, but we do know that she ends up marrying the mayor of District 12 and that she's the mother of Madge, who gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin in the original Hunger Games books. I feel like her perspective would make for a really intriguing narrative and would make a lot of sense. If we think about what happens to Haymitch after his games, we know that 2 weeks after he comes home, the Capitol kills his mother, his little brother, and his girlfriend, essentially choking the narrative of anybody who would have believed his truth and anybody who would have been on his side of the story. Haymitch doesn't really have anybody close left. I would say the closest person he has left is Maisley's twin, because he was Maisley's ally during the games. And the fact that Maisley's twin goes on to marry the mayor of District 12, I feel like it holds pretty significant weight in the story. So then what we will get is maybe the story through the lens of Maisley's twin. She'll be there the morning of the reaping, she'll see her sister get reaped, she'll get to see the games, and after the games she'll see the aftermath of Haymitch's actions and the consequences of the stunt he pulls. I would be really curious to see the type of relationship she develops with Haymitch after the games. Like I said, she's really the closest person Haymitch has left after the Capitol executes his loved ones, and she's really the only person I feel like he has any sort of connection with based on the existing information that we have about Haymitch. I want to see how she recovers from losing her sister to how she becomes the mayor's wife. I wonder, was that a forced decision? Did she choose that for her own safety? Or did she do that as some sort of rebellion where or she's trying to get like information. I don't know. It's all very unclear based on the information that we already have from the original trilogy, but that is also why I think there's a lot of space to explore this. I also wonder if there's going to be the origin story of the Mockingjay pin. Like I mentioned, in the books, Madge is the one who gives Katniss the pen, and Madge's mother is Maisley's twin. Maybe the pin belonged to Maisley, and maybe there's just a much bigger story behind the pin. I think it'll be really interesting to see how Maisley's twin processes the information that is coming out of the Capitol, and the dissonance with what I presume will be information that she receives from Haymitch. I think in telling a story about propaganda, that is a really compelling narrative. Somebody who has access to the truth, but somebody who's also influenced by this opinion from the government. And I don't think Suzanne Collins would introduce a completely new character, which is why I think there is perhaps a chance that Maisley's twin will be the main perspective of the book. So I still think that a story from Maisley's twin would be the most compelling, and this is what I most strongly think the book will be about. But the hole in my theory right now is that Madge was completely cut from the original Hunger Games movies. So in the movies, Gracie Say gives Katniss the pin, and Madge is just non-existent. So then I'm like, when they make this movie adaptation of Sunrise on the Reaping, what are they gonna do about the fact that Madge just didn't exist in the first few movies? But yeah, I don't know. I just think purely from the perspective of the books, I'm like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that the perspective would be from Maisley's twin and Madge's mom. But when I consider the movies, I'm not too sure anymore. But anyways, if you have thoughts of your own, if you have theories of your own, or you see holes in my theory, please do let me know in the comments. I want to discuss this with people. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I will be thinking about it all the way up until the book comes out in March of 2025. In the meantime, while we wait for the book and the film, I do want to share something with you in case you're not already familiar, but there is this phenomenal fan film on the Second Quarter Quell and on Haymitch's games called The Hunger Games, The Second Quarter Quell by Mainstay Productions here on YouTube. I am personally responsible for tens of thousands of these views. I watched this video religiously in middle school, multiple times a day, every night before I went to bed. I was just completely obsessed with it, and to this day I think it is the best fan film out here on the internet. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it. I think it was done very well, and it just really brought the book to life. So yeah, if you're looking to pass your time with something, you should absolutely check that out. Alright, so those are all of my thoughts. If you're still here at this point in the video, thanks for being a real one and sticking through all the rambling. But yeah, like I said, if you have theories or thoughts of your own, please do share them in the comments so we can discuss them. And I'm so curious to hear what everybody is thinking.